Here now with reaction, Fox News contributor, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. I have a lot of questions for you tonight, Mr. Secretary. Please be patient with us. Let's first get your reaction to the release of these two American hostages. In principle, I am against ransom payments for hostages. I really am, because I think it will result in more hostage taking. However, Joe Biden did make that offer to Iran, and I think that worked out terribly, and I thought it was a bad idea. However, I think Israel might have some negotiating room, not necessarily a ransom payment, but they could turn the water back on and the lights back on and services back on if they released hostages. Would that be an area you might support?
Well, Sean, to listen to that man talk about his family coming home is just joy. It is love. It was wonderful to hear. Sitting here just brought me to tears. It's been a long 2 weeks for all of the families that have been held hostage and those who lost loved ones on October 7th. You know, as for the decision about when Israel will go in, I think that's their decision to make. And I've begun to hear a lot of Americans talking about, well, this would be something we should discourage the Israelis for doing. You know, Sean, this is very necessary. If we're going to prevent there from being another 10 American hostages and then another 10 American hostages, you're going to have to take out Hamas jot and tittle. And then the United States is going to have to go after the primary actor, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Last night, President Biden said in his speech, he says, we're going to continue to hold Iran accountable. I mean, it would be laughable if it wasn't so darn dangerous, Sean. Dangerous for every one of us. Danger for every American, danger for every Israeli, danger for the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, everybody in the region. This is the world's largest state sponsor of terror. They killed 30 Americans on October 7th, and they raped grandmas, they killed babies, and this cannot be the case that the defeat of Hamas stops what happened. It has to be the case that Iran is held accountable. We have the capacity to do that, and President Biden has the responsibility. If he's going to deter further aggression and more American hostages being taken, it is not going to be by writing them big checks and making them wealthy. It is going to be by imposing real costs on them, and we know how to do it.
I think you will agree with me, Mr. Secretary, that the goal has to be that Gaza can no longer be a launch zone for what has over the years now been tens and tens and tens of thousands of rockets fired into neighboring Israeli cities. I have been there. I have seen the damage. The city of Sderot has literally had 10,000 rockets by the time I went there a number of years ago, fired into that one city in 10 years, 10,000 rockets. It only takes 13 seconds from the minute it's fired to land, which is why kids play in underground bunker playgrounds. So doesn't one of their major objectives have to be to prevent that from ever becoming a launching pad again?
It's their duty. It's the Israeli government's duty to prevent that from happening again. I heard you say, Sean, that you had been in those tunnels. They need to eliminate the tunnels as well and then prevent them from being rebuilt. It's now pretty clear. When the Israelis pulled out in 2006, Hamas had absolutely no intention of making life better for anyone living in that place. They had the singular intention of continuing to build out, along with their Islamic Republic patron, build out a system that could wipe Jews out of Israel. That can't be permitted to happen. Israel's going to have to take this down. And then the harder task of making sure it's not rebuilt. If we had those kind of missiles landing in the United States from foreign soil, I promise you the President of the United States would have the responsibility to prevent it from ever happening again. And we would take that no matter what any other country told us.
What many may forget is your prior role. Prior to you becoming Secretary of State, you were the head of the CIA. You do know a thing or two about intelligence. I'd never been to Langley, except I came once to have a meeting with you, and it was actually very eye-opening. I felt like I was in a real Jason Bourne movie. But on a serious note, when the media in this country and worldwide, and I'm talking about all the media, ABC, NBC, CBS, MSDNC, CNN, fake news, the New York Times, the Washington Post, when they all came out quoting Hamas propagandists, saying that Israel was responsible for the attack on this hospital and they killed 500 people. Meanwhile, it didn't even hit the hospital. It hit a parking lot and took out a couple of cars. But that went worldwide. And as a result, Israel was put in the horrific position of having to defend itself and prove to the world that it was not true. And in doing so, they had to reveal their intelligence methods and capabilities to the entire world. Obviously, the terrorists that they had on tape likely didn't know they were being taped. And now that the world knows this, they gave up a very important piece of their national security. And I think I can't even calculate the damage that the media did to Israel in this. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's very real, Sean. Look, they should be ashamed of themselves, but we know that that's seldom the case with the New York Times and the Washington Post. We saw what they did talking about the laptop. We saw what they did talking about the Russian hoax narrative. They never even bother to correct themselves. They just collect their prizes, their Pulitzer Prizes, and move on with their lives. In this case, they did two terrible things. In this case, by buying a storyline from Hamas, I mean, think about that, Sean. Buying a storyline from Hamas, they have blood on their hands. There were people injured. There were riots. Our embassies were under assault. And second, they haven't even fixed it yet. And now Israel's had to go out and share both a set of information and some tools that they had, which will change how Israel's able to collect to save further Israeli lives and, frankly, American lives, too. It was reckless. It was certainly dangerous. And I hope that every one of them will go out and say, we got it wrong. We apologize. It was our fault. And then put processes in place from preventing this kind of misinformation from being foisted around the world when they had no reason to believe there was any evidence that this was an Israeli weapon system that actually had executed a strike inside of Gaza.
Okay, let's assume this becomes, Mr. Secretary, a two-front war. Let's assume that they are battling Hezbollah in the north and they are battling Gaza in the south. Also, we have to add this fact, and that is the Iranians are saying your time is up. They have threatened their own involvement in this conflict. Now, if I may add to all of that, we have Iranian rockets and drones have targeted U.S. troops in Iran and Syria. So Iran is involved in the plotting, planning, and scheming. They're providing the weaponry. They're fighting proxy war after proxy war. Now they're threatening direct involvement, and they are directly involved in the attacks against Americans. What should the U.S. role under President Biden be? What should that doctrine be based on what we know they are responsible for right now? He doesn't seem to want to talk about Iran very much.
Sean, first, the fantasy of appeasement needs to be disabused from anyone working in the United States government. They need to, the idea that somehow you're going to appease your way out of this conflict is pure falderall, and it resulted in 30 dead Americans and now still almost a dozen Americans being held. And so, real simple. First, you would go reimpose the economic sanctions. You would impose a price, an economic price on the Islamic Republic of Iran. Second, if you just go back at the proxies, if you just take out the knuckleheads who have been paid to go kill, if that's all you do, and the Ayatollah and President Raisi sit in Tehran, they'll be laughing. That is, they will kill Americans with their proxies, and the Americans will simply kill their proxies. We can't let that be the case. You talked about my time at CIA. We have many tools, Sean, with which to respond to this. There's a wide range of options that can be presented to the President of the United States to make very clear to the Ayatollah that you can't continue what you have been doing. Instead of giving them $6 billion for hostages, we should have told them, if you don't give those hostages back, we will begin to impose costs. That's the way we got hostages back without paying a nickel for them. It works. We can protect America. We can restore deterrence. But we have to be clear that appeasing Iran will never get us to that place where we can be safe, secure, and the Middle East can be safe and secure and prosperous as well.
How damaging has the Biden policy on energy been to rely on the lifeblood of the world's economy on countries, many of whom don't particularly like us? Why did Joe Biden, and what are the consequences of his decision to allow Iran to once again be able to sell their oil on the open markets? Can you even explain to this audience in any reasonable way the thinking behind giving billions of dollars to the #1 state sponsor of terror? I have a hard time understanding the thought process behind that. What part of the acts of terrorism that we're witnessing and the proxy wars that they're fighting are they not understanding?
Sean, I can't explain it. I wish I could. Often I can articulate someone's views, even if they're different from mine. This one is completely unexplainable to me. Think about this. Today, while we've been sitting here today in the United States, 4 million barrels of Iranian crude oil were sold in the open market, generating hundreds of millions of dollars for the Iranian regime. after they've killed 30 Americans. I mean, that's today. Forget what they did last week or 6 months ago or a year ago. This policy still remains in place. They have to get serious about protecting America. We now have 2 wars that have been started in the last 2.5 years. It wasn't inevitable, Sean. This wasn't something that had to be. We need to pray and work for peace, but mostly the United States needs to demonstrate its resolve, its strength. And when we do, we can deter these folks from doing these horrific things. Evil runs on the earth, Sean. We know that. It requires good people to stand up and defend their own sovereignty.
What happens if Iran involves itself in this conflict? To me, that would be a moment where all bets are off and the entire Middle East could be engulfed in a full-fledged war. And what should the response be of Israel and the U.S.? Last question.
I'll give you three groups that should respond. The United States should do what it knows how to do best and support actors in the region to push back against Iran. And frankly, Sean, I'd argue Iran is already in this war. Second, Israel will do its part. It'll continue to defend its own sovereignty. And then I'm convinced, too, there'll be rockets and missiles falling all across the Middle East. I'm convinced that all of the power that can be brought to bear, some of it sitting in the Persian Gulf, some of it sitting at Al Udeid Air Force Base, American power throughout the region will be used. And I'm convinced our Gulf Arab partners will see this threat from Iran for themselves as well. And collectively, I am confident we can make the costs on the Ayatollah so significant that his own people will demand that they change their behavior.
All right, Secretary Mike Pompeo, thank you, sir, for being with us. We always appreciate your time. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.